What's up, guys? This is Taking the Field with Stevie Mack, and on this episode, we're going to talk about the Whipsnakes without Rambo, kind of go through and break all that down a little bit more. Touched on it a few weeks ago here on the podcast, but like I said, we'll go a lot more in depth with that here in just a moment. Later on, I want to get to the power rankings. Haven't been able to do that here in the past couple weeks with things like the All-Star break and the bye week following that, so we'll get back to the power rankings here a little bit later on. Then we'll round out the show as I always like to do, getting your thoughts, your comments in the mix as well. At Stevie Mac Media is where you can follow me on Twitter for all PLL and lacrosse related discussion. But to start off the show here, like I said, I want to really go through and break down the Whipsnakes without Matt Rambo and the struggles that they have had here over the past month or so in his absence. So the Whipsnakes started the year with Rambo healthy and in the lineup at 3-0. Since then, like I said, over the past month or so without him, since then they are 1-3 in their last 4 games with a negative 20 total score differential in those games. Their 3 losses in that stretch are by 10, 6, and 5 goals now in a row. The offense with Rambo, if you want to compare life with Rambo compared to without him, with him in the lineup, they were averaging 13.3 goals a game in that 3-game stretch to start the season with him healthy in the lineup. Without him, though, over these past 4 games with which they've struggled heavily on offense, they're averaging just 8.5 goals a game. So a 5-goal difference between having him in the lineup and having him out of the lineup. So the problem really that I'm noticing now with this Whipsnakes team without Rambo in these last handful of games is that without him, they seemingly have no clutch factor offensively outside of maybe Zed Williams. But with Matt Rambo in the lineup, you always had that guy that late in the shot clock or in a late game situation, if you needed a goal or you needed a play to be made offensively, Rambo more often than not was the guy that you went to in that situation. You can even look back to earlier this season against the Atlas in Baltimore in the last full game that he appeared in. He had that overtime goal to get the win for the Whipsnakes in that game. And you can even go all the way back to 2019 with his overtime goal in the 2019 championship game. But he's always been sort of that clutch guy for the Whipsnakes, and they don't have that necessarily with him out of the lineup. Although you can go back a couple weeks ago to the Whipsnakes and Archers game where Jay Carlson had the goal with about 30 seconds left in that one to give the Whipsnakes the win by 1. But outside of that one instance, they really haven't had that in any of the other games that Rambo wasn't present in. But the other issue that they're having, I mentioned not having the clutch factor outside of maybe Zed, but even the problem with that is that without a guy like Rambo present in the lineup, it's allowing defenses to play them differently with some of these matchups. And more specifically, I think that these defenses have been more aggressive with their slides and throwing double teams at guys like Zed to really put some pressure on him as now being one of the primary playmakers in that offense. And really these defenses, to me, by doing that, are showing that they're not afraid of getting beat anymore. Like if they had been this aggressive before with Rambo in the lineup, yeah, they'd probably be getting burned time and time again. So you're seeing that these defenses are playing this offense a little bit differently with the way that they're matching up. They're definitely being a little more aggressive at times because without him in the lineup, this offense for the Whipsnakes doesn't really pose as heavy of a threat as what it used to. But I think you can't solely blame it on the offense in this situation. But when you look at the Whipsnakes defense, they're now, I think, being exposed a little bit more because the Whipsnakes offense has no ability to possess the ball, which puts then a ton of pressure on their defense. You look at the defense, they're giving up 13.5 goals a game over their last 4. Again, like I said, 1-3 overall record in those last 4 games. And the league average for the season right now is 12 goals against per game. So their score differential, as I mentioned earlier, in their last 4 is -5 per game. So they're -20 overall in their last 4. So per game, they're losing by, 4, 5, 6 goals each game. So again, not really what we would expect from a team like the Whipsnakes in this instance. But also, I think that their lack of ability on offense, their lack of ability to possess and lack of ability to produce at the offensive end is also putting a lot more pressure now on that defense and Kyle Bernlohr in the cage. But we've talked about Rambo sort of taking some of the pressure off this offense with his quote-unquote clutch ability or his clutch factor. And we've also talked about now how it's kind of putting some pressure on the defense as well because of the offense's inability to possess the ball for periods of time. But also one of the things that's hurt them specifically in the last 2 games has been the struggles of Joe Nardella at the stripe with his ability to win them faceoffs in the last 2 games. You look at his first 5 games of the year, Nardella was one of the top 2 faceoff guys in the league, battling it out with TD Erlin for the top spot. In his first 5 games, he was going 61% and even had 2 games within that first 5-game stretch where he was 70% or better and had 4 games where he had 16 or more wins in that game alone. Whereas you contrast that with the last 2 games he's played, he's 38% over those 2 games and has 16 combined wins over those 2 games. So you talk about having 4 games of 16 or more wins the first half of the year. Now he has 16 total wins in his last 2. So I think the good news in this situation for the Whipsnakes is that Jim Stagnita said after their game Sunday afternoon that they're working towards getting Rambo back for the final weekend of the regular season and heading towards the playoffs. And that's a very big weekend for this Whipsnakes club because their 2 games that they have that weekend are against really, really tough opponents in the Redwoods and the Archers. And these are games that I think plain and simply they need to win, not just for the purposes of the standings, but I think just for momentum in general, right? Like entering the postseason with a bit of confidence and being able to take down 2 teams that are currently ahead of you in the standings and getting a playmaker like Matt Rambo back, getting a leader like that back on the field, I think will be very important for them heading into the postseason. So I think that's definitely something that needs to happen for this club is getting him back on the field. And obviously if his injury is that severe that it's kept him out for this long, then obviously don't put him back out there if he's not ready to go. Similar with the injury to Michael Sowers, they've really been holding him out, I think, for a while with his concussion issues that he suffered at the beginning of the year, because again, if the injury is that severe, why rush him back and risk getting him more injured? And I think that the same, like I said, can be said about Matt Rambo in this case, is you're going to make the postseason, so why put him back out there if he's not ready? Because then you're just going to make the injury that much worse. But I do think that even with getting him back in the lineup, and this is something that Stagnita touched on in that post-game press conferences, that Rambo isn't holistically the answer for this team. Like, getting him back in the lineup is not going to fix all their problems. Yes, he is a big part of the puzzle with this Whipsnakes club, but and he is a part of who they were before the injury. You know, we talked about them being the gold standard in pro field lacrosse and the team that everybody was kind of looking up at in that instance. I think that, like Stagnita said, he's not the answer. He's not the only thing that's wrong with this team right now is his absence. There's a lot of other things going on that we need to address. But yeah, I think getting him back in the lineup and getting his leadership back, especially on the offensive half of the field, is going to be very, very important for this Whipsnakes club. But on the other side of this break, we're going to get to the power rankings following this past weekend in Colorado. Some new teams up near the top of those rankings, but we'll get to all 8 of the power rankings next on Taking the Field with Stevie Mack. Welcome back. Taking the Field with Stevie Mac, segment 2 of 3 here on a Monday following the PLL weekend in Colorado. We're going to get to the power rankings here, in just a second. Like I said before the break, some new faces up near the top of the rankings, some shakeup here in the top 4 or 5. So to get right to it, the Atlas come in at number 1. They're the number 1 team in the PLL standings right now after going 2-0 in Colorado over the weekend. But I also think that they're the hottest team right now in the league. They've rattled off 5 straight wins with a combined score differential of plus 23 over that span. So per game, that's a 4.6 score differential per game. And I think JD Colarusso in the cage replacing Jack Kincannon has been absolutely fantastic. He's currently at 51.6% in his first 3 starts replacing Kincannon in the cage, and he's averaging just over 10.5 saves per game. So like I said, doing a phenomenal job in the cage for this Atlas team. And the defense, I think, has also really helped him out in a lot of ways as well. They've really played strong in front of him on the defensive half of the field, giving up a little bit over 10 goals per game over that 3-game stretch, which in this league, if you can hold teams to 9, 10, 11 goals, most nights you're going to have a good shot at winning, and that's exactly what Colarusso and this defense has done over these past few games. And that is a big reason why, with this 5-game stretch that they're on right now, is a big reason why they're now not only number 1 in these power rankings, but number 1 in the league standing as well. Number 2, I've got the Water Dogs, and it's crazy for me to think back to the beginning of this year because there was a time at one point or another where the Atlas and the Water Dogs occupied that number 8 spot in these power rankings, and now they're the top 2 teams in the league and top 2 teams in these power rankings. And the Water Dogs have now won 3 straight, and Dylan Ward, to me, looks like the goalie that I was told he would be when he got his chance to start this year. I've talked about it before on past episodes of the podcast about his struggles that first half of the season in the cage for them, and defensively just the struggles that the Water Dogs had that first half of the year. But now you're really starting to see that defensive unit, and Dylan Ward in particular, playing at the high level that we were told to expect from them going into this season. And during this 3-game stretch, Ward has made 66% of his saves, including a season-high 76% with a season-high 19 saves in their game the other day against the Whipsnakes. The Archers, I've got number 3. The Archers ended their 3-game losing streak to the Redwoods this weekend, and Grant Ament is one of the leaders in points offensively for the entire league, not just for the Archers, but for the entire league. And Adam Gittleman is continuing to play at such a high level this year. He's above 60% on saves for the year. And the Archers, to go along with that, have the number 1 defense in scores against per game. So despite their now ended losing streak of 3 games that they ended this past weekend in Colorado, I really think that this is a top 3, at worst, top 4 team in the PLL right now. I've got the Redwoods at number 4 because putting the Archers over the Redwoods, I think, was tough, but I think that you could make a case for the Redwoods at 3. And I think that considering the Archers ended their losing streak, like I said, by beating the Redwoods head-to-head this weekend, it makes that argument a bit harder for putting the Redwoods over the Archers because of recency. But the Redwoods, I think, are still kind of like how I said with the Archers. They're at worst a top 4 team right now, despite being 2-2 in their last 4 games. But this is a team that's still 3rd in scores against average in the league. They're number 1 in faceoffs thanks to TD Erlin, and they have the number 1 penalty killing unit in the PLL. So this team, while they might kind of be a fringe top 3 team right now, they will be ready to compete come the playoffs here in a couple weeks. Number 5, I've got the Whipsnakes. to me, it's kind of like how I said at the beginning of this segment with the Atlas and the Atlas and the Water Dogs going from the bottom of the rankings to the top. This is similar to me having the Whipsnakes at 5. It's crazy to think that just a few games ago, the Whipsnakes have gone from being the first place team to now all the way down to 5th in the PLL standings, and that's where I have them in these power rankings. But the Whipsnakes, as I discussed in segment 1, have really struggled without Matt Rambo, not just offensively, but you're seeing the effects of that defensively, and now with the struggles of Joe Nardella at the stripe the past couple games. But he may not possess the answers for the Whipsnakes, but as talked about earlier, he hides a lot of their inefficiencies because of that sort of clutch factor that we talked about, and his ability to command that offense the way that we know he can do. And I mean, you look at this team, even defensively, as good as we've seen them be defensively, I don't believe they're even top 3, top 4 in the PLL anymore in terms of scores against. And even as good as we know that a guy like Kyle Bernlohr is in the cage, the Whipsnakes currently rank 7th in goalie statistics in the league. So the Whipsnakes check in at number 5. Number 6, I've got the Chaos. The Chaos have had their share of issues this season for sure, where things like the offense has been wildly inconsistent at times. You even go back to that game against the Atlas where they went almost 24 whole minutes of game time without scoring a goal. And we've talked at length about the issues they've had at the stripe this year on faceoffs. And I think the defense as well, similarly with the offense, can go stretches of games where they play just kind of poorly in front of Blaze Reardon. But somehow, despite all of that, but despite their struggles offensively, despite their struggles at the faceoff stripe, despite all of that, they're one win away from being a 500 team with 2 games left in their regular season schedule. So if they win out those last 2 games, they will actually finish above 500 despite the struggles that they've had this year. And one bright spot that you can take from this Chaos team has been their ability to space the field offensively and to get open looks for 2-pointers, because that is something that they are now tied for second in the league, is 2-point goals with 8. And for a while there, they were actually tied for first with the Atlas, but now they're tied for second as the Atlas have now overtaken them by a couple of 2-pointers. But the Cannons come in at number 7. The Cannons are good, but then again, they're really not, right? Like, it's kind of a weird thing where it's like, we know they're good, but yet somehow they're just not putting it together. So they play hard, I think. They play for the full 48 minutes of game, but they just don't, I think, have what it takes right now to win in this league. I mean, they lost another 1-goal game this weekend, and that's their 5th 1-goal loss of the, or excuse me, 5th 1-goal game of the year. And in those 5 games, they're now 1-4. And it's their second 1-goal loss at the hands of the Atlas this year. And the stripe for the Cannons has been really tough. It's been really tough going for them this year on faceoffs, even despite overhauling that position mid-season. I mean, you talk about they moved on from Tommy Kelly. They made a trade to bring in Riesman. They signed Peyton Smith. They completely overhauled that position, and yet you're still seeing those same struggles for them on faceoffs. And then Chrome come in to round out the power rankings at number 8. I mean, plain and simply here, the Chrome should not be this bad. And I get that they've had their injuries. It's been well talked about on this show. It's been well talked about on Lacrosse Twitter throughout the season. Yes, they've had their injuries to some key guys, but many of those came in the early stages of the season where you've had plenty of time since then to go out in the player pool and to get better and make the kind of adjustments that you need to make. And And really, I've only really seen them bringing in offensive players. Yes, they've struggled offensively throughout the year. Guys like Gutterding just have really failed to get going this year. It took Colin Heacock several games to get going. They really relied those first couple weekends on some of those rookies that they had offensively, like Jackson Morrill in specific. So they go out and they sign some offensive guys like Tom Palasek, Malloy, even bringing in Kevin Rogers early in the season out of the player pool as a rookie. But with injuries to guys like Bernhardt and JT Giles Harris, who was their first round pick this year and has missed the entire season because of injury, it's really surprised me the lack of moves that they've made on the defensive side. Yes, they've made one or two signings and things like that, but really choosing to focus more on overhauling the offense rather than making some signings and some roster changes with the defense to cushion some of the blow from losing guys like Bernhardt. Because I think that while this league's with the league, the offense is always going to be good, right? Like we've talked about before, the sort of arms race offensively that some of these teams went through this offseason, teams like the Archers more specifically. But at the same time, you still have to be able to stop someone once in a while. But the Chrome, over their last 4 games, are giving up over 15 goals per game in that stretch. So I can understand wanting to make the moves that they've made offensively to create some consistency on that end, but you still have to be able to stop somebody once in a while, and they just haven't been able to do that this year, which is why they currently sit, I believe, after this weekend at 2-5, maybe 2-6 overall on the year. But we got one more segment to hit on as we wrapped up the power rankings here in segment 2. Final segment coming out of the break, we're going to get to your thoughts, your comments following this weekend in Colorado for the PLL. We got one more weekend of the regular season to hit here in a couple weeks out in Albany, but you're listening to Taking the Field with Stevie Mack. Welcome back. Final segment here on Taking the Field with Stevie Mack. Segment 1, we went over a little bit of a deep dive into the struggles by the Whipsnakes here over their last handful of games without Matt Rambo. Good news is, though, that they're looking to get him back for the final week of the regular season out in Albany. Segment 2, we hit on the power rankings. Atlas checked in at number 1 on the list here this week. Chrome rounded us out at number 8. Final segment here, we're going to get to your thoughts and your comments from this past weekend in Colorado for the PLL. At Stevie Mac Media is my Twitter handle. You can hit me up there for all lacrosse and show-related discussion. From Michael Ramirez, good friend of the show on Twitter, says, Atlas at 6-2 is far beyond what I expected from the Bulls. The family dinner mentality has everyone buying in, and you're seeing the end result. Ben Rubior has been playing chess since day one. Yeah, I mean, I've even said it at times on this show over the past month or so as this now 5-game winning streak for the Atlas has gone on, is that all I wanted to see from them this year was that, especially after that loss to the Archers in week 1, all I wanted to see from them was putting that vision in place that Ben Rubior talked about when he first got hired by the Atlas in 2020. He talked about that vision of what he wanted this team to be, the style that they wanted to play, the personnel that he wanted to bring in. I really wanted to see that vision take shape, and I just wanted to see, after that loss to the Archers, a week-to-week improvement, that you're installing the system, you're getting the guys in place to be able to run that system and play that style between the arcs like he talked about. But I don't think any of us could have predicted that we would see it this early on. I think we all sort of thought, okay, maybe by the end of this year and, heading into 2022, that's when you're going to start to see sort of those gears start to turn with this team. I don't think we imagined it happening by the fourth week of the regular season and even continuing it on as we make our push to the playoffs. So yes, they have made a lot of really solid moves to set themselves up for where they currently are, because they went into this past off season and just completely blew it up. They traded anybody they could get something for, and they really hit on a lot of their entry draft picks, and I think especially in the college draft as well. Between those two, yes, they did have a lot of picks that they could work with, but they hit on so many of those, and I think that's a big reason why they've been so successful as of late, is because it was so important for them to hit on some of those picks the way that they did, with guys like Teat going number 1, or Jake Caraway, or Danny Logan, or even we saw the arrival of Peter Dirth this weekend suiting up for the Atlases. They had 5 of their 6 rookies from the college draft dressed this weekend in Colorado. So yes, we are starting to see that Ben Rubio vision really taking shape right here, right now in 2021, when I think most of us thought it was going to be probably 2022 until we really saw them start to reap those benefits. From King Street Linden, he says, we like to say that these rosters are super talented and they should add more teams, but ultimately an expansion team rarely has success, even with the MLL surplus coming in. So I think here it's more so just being able to identify talent and identifying fit for your team. Just because a guy maybe had success in a past life, now I guess you could say, in the MLL, doesn't mean that they might necessarily come in and be an instant impact on your team. I definitely think that fit has a lot to do with it, and that's something you're seeing with this Atlas team, is they traded away guys like Rabel and Busick and Ryan Brown and Rob Pennell that were more individual players. They could make plays on their own, and they went for guys that could more fit the system that they wanted to run, that family style that we've been talking about. So I think that, and you even look at a team like the Atlas, I would argue that in a sense they kind of came into this year as an expansion team because of the work that they did in the offseason to overhaul this roster and completely flip it from where it was even a year ago. Coach Shrek, as always, had to light us up with several comments here this weekend, so we'll get to each one of his. He starts it out by saying, we give the Atlas offense and Ben Rubio a lot of credit and face time. However, we have to commend Clausen and the Atlas defense for how well they played so far this season. Yeah, and I think that anytime you have the kind of firepower that this Atlas offense now possesses, with some of these young guys like Caraway and Jeff Teat, and the ability for those kinds of guys to play within the offense the way that they are, and the sort of unselfish play that we're seeing from that unit specifically here over the past few weeks, and really embodying that family mentality that they have, that yeah, it's easy to get caught up in all the goals and the plays that they're making at that end of the field. But no, I definitely agree that it can't be overlooked or overstated how well this defense has been playing. And I even mentioned it during the power rankings in segment 2, is that even with JD Colarusso in the cage for the injured Jack Kincannon, there's been zero, and I mean zero, drop off from this team defensively and the goalie position in particular with this Atlas team. So yes, they have done a fantastic job on that end of the field. And I think the only reason that their scores against average, when you look at the PLL website, the only reason I think that they aren't higher up on that list on the PLL rankings is because of that game against the Archers week 1, kind of still being haunted by that game in a sense. And also in their win against the Cannons about a month ago now, when they gave up 17 goals in a win, right? So it's like, I think that they've definitely played better since those games, but they're still in a sense being haunted by giving up that many goals in those 2 games. He then says, Whipsnakes look like a shell of their former selves, Nardella getting owned at the stripe, Whips giving up big runs, and nobody, not named Zed Williams, really stepping up in Rambo's presence. In Rambo's absence. Yeah, and that's something I talked about at the top of the show. They've definitely struggled. They're now 1-3 in their last 4 games. I believe I said they have a negative 20 score differential over that span. So yeah, they're not playing well. Nardella now compounding the issue with his struggles the last 2 games at the stripe, and they really have no clutch ability offensively outside of Zed Williams, but with the absence of Rambo, that's now putting added pressure on him even to produce at a high level for this offense. Shrek says, Redwood's turnover problems haunt them again. It felt like they were playing Atlas all over again in week 2. So many shots either wide or right at Gittleman on his stick. Yeah, I didn't get a chance to watch that game on Saturday. I was attending my first ever wedding that I've ever been to. So I didn't really get a chance to watch the game from Saturday with the Redwoods, but very quietly, the Redwoods don't turn the ball over a ton. If you go look at the stats on the PLO website, they don't turn it over a ton, but when they do, it's at very inopportune times. Like it really hurts them the times that they do, right? So, and from what it sounds like, this was another one of those games where it kills their momentum offensively. It kills their ability to make plays. And again, it happens at the most inopportune times. And then he says, also great seeing Dylan Malloy back in the PLL. May not fully be the answer the Chrome are looking for long term, but overall, the dude can straight up ball out. Yeah, it is nice after we've talked about it at length on Lacrosse Twitter about when is he going to get signed, who's going to be the one to sign him, and things like that. Now he's here, so we can kind of put that to rest, and now we get to enjoy watching him play in the PLL with the Chrome. And yeah, maybe he doesn't make the biggest impact for this team. It may have been possibly a little too late for this Chrome team trying to get anything going for them in terms of momentum. But yeah, it is just, in general, it's nice to have a talent like Dylan Malloy now present in the league. And from Thomas Walters to round out the show says, do teams with more 2019 and 2020 PLL veterans have better success than teams with more rookies and MLL players? It would take some work to run the numbers, but it would be interesting to see just how much veteran presence helps in this league. So yeah, I mean, he mentions having to work out the numbers and really breaking down these rosters, and maybe that's something that I can do heading into Thursday's episode here on Taking the Field with Stevie Mac. But if I had to guess, based off just kind of the eye test, so to speak, and knowing what we know about the makeups of these 8 clubs, is that it almost seems like you have to have a balance, right? Like you have to have a balance of former MLL guys, a couple college picks, maybe, a couple impact rookies this year, but then also having guys that have played at least dating back to 2020 together, if not going back all the way to 2019. So I think that when you look at a team like, let's say, the Redwoods, the majority, I would argue, of that team has been playing together on this Redwood squad since 2019. Now you add in an impact rookie like TD Erlin, you make a trade for a guy like Rob Pennell this offseason, or on the other end of the spectrum, you look at a team like the Atlas who just completely blew it up and went for whoever gave them the best fit for their system. They went through the entry draft, they went through the college draft, and they loaded up on MLL talent and high impact rookies with a lot of those early picks in the first 2 rounds. So yeah, I definitely think that in a sense, you have to have a healthy balance between guys that have played together the past couple of years on their respective clubs. You have to have at least 1 or 2 impact rookies on your team, and maybe you go out in the entry draft and get a veteran guy from the MLL in the entry draft. So yeah, I definitely think if you go through and really break it down with these 8 rosters, I'd love to see what the differences and similarities is. And I said that that's something that we might be able to hit on come Thursday's episode on the podcast. But just kind of taking it for what it is at face value and knowing what we know about the makeups of these rosters, I do think that to some degree it takes a healthy balance of having guys from the MLL, from the entry draft, having guys from the college draft that can come in right away and make an impact, and having guys, like I said, with the Redwoods in particular, having a unit like their midfield where you've got guys like Perkovic and Miles Jones and Henningberg and guys like that have played together now for multiple years and know each other's tendencies and things like that. Definitely makes a difference for your club. But that'll do it for this episode of Taking the Field with Stevie Mac. Make sure to like, comment, and share on this post as always. You can check out the podcast anywhere you get your podcasts, including Spotify, Google, Apple Podcasts. It's now on iHeartRadio and TuneIn as well for you to listen to and follow along there. But that'll do it for me. I'll talk to you guys later.